Welcome, everyone. My name is Shelley Murphy, and I'm going to be a host and presenter today. And I'd like to welcome everyone to a call to engage descendants of the enslaved at the Tuleyries. Here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. Number one, why we're here, an introduction in Antonio Austin's research. We'll discuss African-American genealogy challenges. We do the acknowledgement of the enslaved that were owned by the Tuley family, Earl, Brownlee, and Mitchell, and some other slaveholders connected to these families. We're going to show about our progress. We will review throughout typical slave era records from Antonio and myself, further opportunities, and then what actually we need from you, the community. And that's through the engagement. I also want to recognize the Blandy, Arboretum, and also the University of Virginia and the University of Virginia Foundation, as well as the Descendants.
You muted yourself.
Thank you. Where at was running through the overview, the progress, typical slave era records and resources. Someone's hitting me because I'm not hitting the keys. So, and whatever else that we need, we're trying to engage with the community. And I do want to acknowledge again the collaborators in the University of Virginia, the foundation, as well as Blandy Arboretum. And so we're going to go ahead and have a Q&A session at the end. So just stay tuned. I got a few more things to share. A little bit of housekeeping. The session is being recorded. If you do not want to be in a photo, just turn off your camera. Please mute yourself during the presentation. And again, if you have any questions, Antonio and I will take them at the end. Just put a Q in front of your question, and then Ariel and Connor will see them, and those will be the questions we'll get to towards the end. Later, the recording will be available on Blandy's website and also on the Facebook page, Finding Enslaved Laborers at UVA, and also Descendants of Enslaved Communities Facebook page. So for number one, why are we here? First, let us thank you for showing up and being here on your Saturday morning. We want to let you know what we're working on in your community. And of course, we're going to need your help. Our ultimate goal is seeking descendants of the enslaved at the Tuleyries. And again, we're also seeking your help to find descendants of the slaveholders. There's other projects that the University of Virginia and the foundation have that are ongoing. And so I listed 3 of them. The Memorial for the Enslaved Laborers, which reference around Arboretum County and 7 other counties around the university. Also Birdwood Plantation, which is in Albemarle, and also the Morven. And there are some more. If anyone has any questions or anything regarding that, just please contact me and I can follow up with you from there. So the first thing I want to do is introduce Antonio. Glad to have you here with me. Antonio served as an intern, and he can tell you a little bit more about that at the Blandy Arboretum, and he's going to introduce his work, and then I pick up from his work going forward. So Antonio, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Antonio Austin. I am a Ph.D. candidate at Howard University, majoring in United States history with a minor in public history. And I was fortunate to be the first intern for this project. I came on board in May of 2021, and it has been such a great experience for me, to be honest with you. It's been amazing having the opportunity to work with the Blandy staff, to work with the community members, to continue the work with Dr. Murphy. It's just been a really, really great opportunity. So we will go ahead and get started. So if you go to the next slide for me, please. All right. So the left is a image from the backside of the quarters. This was around 1927, around the time in which the University of Virginia actually obtained the property. So the quarters historically was just one wing. However, in the early 1940s, UVA actually added onto that property. So it's now currently in a U shape. So this is what was known as the slave quarters. It was a barrack style slave quarters. And this building is actually still used in this day for housing interns, but also for offices for the Blandy staff. On the right is the slave cemetery, which is on the property of the Arboretum. And during the spring of 2021, the staff was actually able to get ground penetrating radar done, which detected 40 disturbances, meaning 40 graves. So this is kind of what started the research and what actually got me to Blandy Experimental Farm. So my research approach, I have been doing genealogy at this point for like over half of my life, so most of my life. And so what I did was I adopted a genealogy framework in which I started from a particular event, which was the death of Colonel Tuley, Colonel Joseph Tuley in 1860, and I worked backwards. I utilized various online resources, digital databases, and even Google, because Google can be very helpful when it comes to actually locating where various collections are at different repositories. I utilize on-site resources such as courthouses, libraries. I talked to people, and my goal was to center the experiences of those individuals who were enslaved. So the barriers within research was the fact that I was researching the enslaved people. This is something that is definitely possible, right? However, whereas some traditional genealogy may be like walking through the door, with you're doing slavery era research, you may have to hop in a window, or you might have to get a ladder and, climb up to the second floor to kind of get the information and the things that you need. So you have to be very creative. There was information missing from records because these people were seen as chattel, not as individuals. So there wasn't much care that was presented in that. And lastly, there was a lack of family documents. So there's not a lot of information that we were able to specifically find within the family's collection, which that was kind of disheartening in a way. So going to the Tuley family. So the individuals that we're going to be talking about today is the Tuley family. So the patriarch of this family is Joseph Tuley, who was born in New Jersey. We are really unsure of what brought him to Virginia, but we know that sources say that he had a little education, a little money, and he had a trade, meaning he was a tanner. He operated a tannery in Millwood, which is an area of Clarke County, what became Clarke County. He married Anne Brownlee in 1787, and this line is who we're focusing on mainly today. And we're going to focus on first Colonel Joseph Tuley Jr. And I'm going to differentiate them by saying Joseph Sr. and Colonel Tuley, just so we know the difference. So this is actually a photo of Colonel Joseph Tuley and his wife, Mary Wheeler Edelyn Jackson Tuley. They were married in Washington, D.C. on the 20th of April, 1835. So he was actually the individual that constructed the Tuleyries. His father had purchased, tracts of the land on which the property now sits, but he actually constructed the the quarters, which we believe was used temporarily by the family until the actual mansion was built, and then turned into, of course, the slave quarters. And his wife was Mary Wheeler Edelyn Jackson, and she was married to a Dr. Jackson prior to being married to Tuley, and she was the mother of 3 children. So the timeline. Joseph died, Colonel Joseph Tuley died unexpectedly in 1860. He was coming back from the Caribbean, and he died at that time. In August of 1860, there was a group of community members that were sent to create an inventory and appraisement for his property. So that was actually, in that day, around $64,857.24, which is approximately around $1.9 million to this day. And so their enslaved people, which totaled some 60 plus, was actually valued at around $800,000. So we have this timeline. Like I said, in October, we have them advertising the estate, trying to sell the estate itself, but also meaning the property and parts of the enslaved people. But there's some discrepancy, which we'll see on the next slide. Also, Mary Tuley actually sells her dower rights, which is a third of the estate, to the heirs, which ends up being his siblings, but also some of his nieces and nephews after his siblings pass away. And then we see an estate sale happening later during the 1860 year. So in these advertisements from the Alexandria Gazette, they're actually sitting on top of each other, and one is put into the newspaper by Mary Tuley, who was the administratrix of the state, but also the next one on the right was actually put in by Joseph Tuley Mitchell. So Joseph and Tuley are 2 names that they use so many times throughout the generation, but Joseph Tuley Mitchell was actually the son of Mary Tuley Mitchell, one of the sisters of Colonel Tuley. And the interesting difference is the fact that she does not mention any sale of enslaved people. However, I know it's probably kind of hard to see, but he says, I will also sell at the same time and place 63 Negroes comprising mechanics, house carpenters, and farm hands, an unusually likely young and valuable lot of Negroes seldom offered for sale in any community. So seeing these discrepancies and seeing how enslaved people were treated as chattel and viewed as chattel, kind of knew there was going to be some issues lying ahead. So in the appraisement and inventory was extremely valuable when it came to the beginning of this research, because it lists all of the enslaved people, and it lists not only their names, it lists their ages, and for some of them, it actually lists family groups, which for this time is extremely, extremely important because it allows us to, at least with what Dr. Shelley Murphy is doing, it allows her in her research to connect with the descendants of these people, because we're able to kind of parse out these families. And because he died in 1860, we know that they're going to be listed on the 1870 census. We know they're going to be listed in other types of vital records after enslavement. So this is a continuation of the list of enslaved people. And one of the things I want to make note is that folks oftentimes believe that enslaved people did not have surnames, but in fact they did. And this just shows that these surnames were recognized. We also know that none of the enslaved people after emancipation took the Tuley name. So I know that's the case for, some families, including some of my own family research. But in this case, they all took names, either the names that they had prior to emancipation, or they chose names afterwards. This is just a showing that at the around the time they were doing the estate sale, they were also hiring people out, but you'll see there's a lot of people that have no bid, and this is likely because you see that it says the hiring of slaves, November 8th, 1860. At this point, there's not much time left in the year. It's not like there's crops being, harvested or anything like that. So there's a lot of folks that that don't have any type of bid on them. So if you can go to the next, this is just the hiring list. Continue. Okay, so this shows a promise. It's like a promissory note, essentially, from Joseph Tuley Mitchell, which is Colonel Tuley and Mary Tuley's nephew. And it's just showing that he is saying that he is, he's renting these enslaved people, John, Celia, and Davy, and he is promising to pay and, of course, to provide these enslaved people their summer and winter clothing along with a blanket. And he is paying to Mary Tuley $218 to utilize these individuals in their labor. All right, so the census data is very interesting. So we see, and this is specifically for Joseph Tuley Sr. and for Colonel Joseph Tuley, so father and son, we see this, this interesting breakdown of the enslaved people. So in 1810, Senior only has 9 people, but we see that this continues to increase and increase, and then around 1850, 1860, it decreases. One note that I want to mention is 1850 and 1860, there was actually slave schedules which were kind of addendums to the regular census. And so in the 1850 census, of these 65 people, about a third of these individuals are notated as being mulatto. So this, I'm not sure if it's the paternity of these individuals could have been Tuley family. It could have been those individuals who the Tuleys actually hired, as in the white overseers. Not really sure, but it was very interesting that that was notated in that specific document. And so, though you see that there were, this was a plantation, there was, quite a bit of individuals working this property. We do see that there is buying and selling of enslaved people. So, while we do want to believe that, people were, for the most part kept together, and we kind of see that in the records, but we do see that these individuals, the Tuley family, they were enslavers. So whether that be because of the behavior of these enslaved people, whether it be the fact that they were greedy and just wanted money, or whether it be they needed to downsize because of going into debt. Not really sure which is the correct answer, but we do see this note from 1861 that refers to a sale of Gabe and Henson in 1857. All right, so we're going back a generation. So we're going back to Joseph Tuley Sr. and his wife, Nancy Brownlee, or she's also referred to as Anne oftentimes. She is, sorry, hold on. He was also a tanner by trade, and he actually inherited some enslaved people, but also money from his father-in-law's estate. And he additionally bought enslaved people from his son-in-law's estate. The son-in-law, Mary Tuley Mitchell's husband, Henry Mitchell, actually passed away quite young, and he purchased most of the enslaved people from his estate. And I also found that he actually died around 1825 with a will, which is very important because it lets us know kind of what he wanted to devise his assets and his enslaved people to. So with the Brownlees division of the enslaved, we see that there's 3 different lots. The first 2 are the husbands of the Brownlees' daughters. And we see that lot 2 is actually drawn by Joseph Tuley. He inherits Nancy, Lucy, Betty, Ben, Phoebe, Phil, and Jack. We also know that when Betsy Brownlee, who is John Brownlee's wife, when she passes away in 1815, we know there is a meeting between Esaias Earl and Tuley because Esaias Earl essentially didn't receive the same value of enslaved people. So Tuley had to pay him. But we find out that Tuley received Peter, his wife Tamar, and their son Elisha. All right, so the death of the son-in-law, as I mentioned before, there was a total of 11 enslaved people that Henry Mitchell owned, and we know that Joseph Tuley purchased at least 9 of these enslaved people, and we know that this property was both in Augusta County and Frederick counties. And I must note that Clarke County, which is where Tuleyries is now located, it was formed out of Frederick County in 1836. So if I use them interchangeably, that's the reason why. So the will of Joseph Tuley Sr. So I think I'm going to have some words on here. Can you go forward for me, please? Okay, so we have his children inheriting enslaved people. So they all inherit a couple of enslaved people. However, we see that Joseph actually gets the remainder of the enslaved. He also gets the property. He's the youngest child, and we know that sometimes that is what happens with being the youngest child, but also being the only boy to survive to adulthood. All right, if you can go next. One of the really insightful things that I was able to find was that there was a chancery case between Joseph Tuley, Colonel Joseph Tuley, and Bickle in 1858. And this all stems from the fact that his nephew, Colonel Tuley's nephew, George Mitchell, actually owes some creditors money. And as I mentioned before, these enslaved people were seen as chattel, they're seen as property, therefore they have value. And these enslaved people, Winnie and her 5 children, were actually seized and put in jail. And so Colonel Tuley sued because he was suing for the rights of his property. But what was intriguing was the fact that this family, they mentioned, of course, Winnie, of course, because she was the person that was enslaved. However, the things that they remembered about her was strictly limited to her her status as a slave. So one of the depositions mentions that they didn't remember how old she was, but they know she was around 18 to 12 years old because she could make up a bed when she came to live in Stanton, which is where Mary Mitchell and her family lived. We also find out from Mary Mitchell's own testimony that she had some audacity, to say the least, because she would carry her enslaved people through free territory when visiting relatives, and would mention how she actually mentioned how she lost some enslaved people because they emancipated themselves. They ran away. And were not able to be recovered. Thank you so much. And another chancery case that was monumental to this research was the administratrix of Colonel Joseph Tuley, et cetera, versus the executor of Mary Mitchell, et cetera. And the reason why this was so pivotal was because there was a lot of great information that was mentioned in this. This case was about 1,000 pages. I was not able to go through it during my time interning, but it gave us right here the name of one of the enslaved people. So the question was asked, it was essentially showing a deposition by Mary Tuley, and it asked her daughter whose slave was Dick. And her answer was Mrs. Tuley's. His name was Dick Colbert. And she was saying there were 2 men enslaved on the plantation named Dick, but she believed that Colbert was the person that she was talking about, or that the person was referring to. So this allowed for some great information. So if you go next. One of the really interesting receipts that we found, and Mary Tuley was great at keeping receipts, and she had, during the time of the Civil War, Winchester in particular, so this would be Frederick County and also Clarke County, this was a zone, it was a battle zone essentially that turned over to each side. There, it was very tumultuous. And it turned over very frequently. So you see that during this time, it's very opportune for people to self-emancipate, for them to run away. And this is a receipt of an unnamed enslaved woman who actually was captured in Pennsylvania in 1863, and she paid $257 to get this woman back. There was also a man named Sam who also ran away, and she paid $500 for him to be returned. She even sent some of her enslaved people to Richmond and Stanton during the Civil War, and paid around $400 for their care. And this was likely to ensure that they would not run away, because of course, if you look at where the property is versus Richmond and Stanton, these places are closer to, or further south, closer to like the North Carolina, Tennessee line. So going into the Colbert family, so Dick Colbert, as was mentioned in this case, I went back and referred to census records, but then I also referred to the inventory and appraisement. And I see in 1870 that there's this family. Richard is the formal of Dick. And so you see Richard Colbert with his wife, and their many children. And so I see these names, and it starts ringing a bell because I remember seeing these names. So if you see his wife's name is Mahalia, and to the right, you see Mahalia and Infant, and then you see Scott. So you see Scott and Louisa and all these names that are repeating. So I knew that I found my first family who was from this plantation. So some of my interesting finds was in Colonel Tuley Sr.'s, or excuse me, I just mixed that all up. In Joseph Tuley Sr.'s will from the 1820s, he actually had a provision where he left Hannah, who has nursed and has nursed him in his different bouts of sickness, free to all intents and purposes, and to be paid $40 if it should be necessary for her to leave the state. When in for some states, it was a requirement after certain periods that people who were emancipated were to leave. Unfortunately, I was not able to find where Hannah was actually emancipated, so I'm not sure what happened with her. But another freedom seeker, I'll call her, was Susanna, who was notated as a bright mulatto girl about 17 years old. She was purchased from an estate sale in Upperville, which is next door in Fauquier County. And she was purchased in around 1842, I believe. And she, according to this, this ad, left without provocation. She just got up and she ran away. And it was interesting because I had never seen the fact that someone was taking a trunk with them. It mentions in all of these wanted ads that she took a trunk with her, and they thought that she was either in Upperville or she may have made it to DC, which they believe was her ultimate goal. And you see that he was giving them $100 if she was found in an anti-slave state, and $50 if she was in the district, or $25 in the state of Virginia. And the next couple of slides, we have some register of deaths, and these register of deaths were required by the state of Virginia. Register of deaths and births were required by the state of Virginia for enslaved and free people, including free whites and free people of color. And we see Joseph Tuley does report births, and we see that he reports deaths, but there's not a lot of information. There is information for the enslaved person's name. There's information for, their parents' names, but we see that there's not this care, this even humanity given to these individuals to even describe, who they were. And this is a continuation, 1854. And if you look here, we see right here at the top, we see Joseph Tuley, we see Joseph in parentheses Colonel. So you see all of these female, female, male, male. And you see they have, you know, the years and the county. But if you look at some of these other entries for these other counties, we see, you know, there's some, great information. There's the names of the enslaved, the baby that's being born. There's names of the mother and sometimes names of the fathers and the exact date of birth. So this was one of the frustrations that I encountered during my time researching.
And this is where I pick up.
Yes.
Go ahead if you have some final thoughts.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shelley Murphy.
Well, one of the things for me to pick up on this outstanding research, because if you notice, everywhere he talked about something actually was tied to a record. So but for those of you that do research, those were some of the records you should look for. And we'll cover more of that later in this presentation. So I have a rule when I start working. I'm going to follow the money, the land, the water, the community, and the faith of the people. And as you can see, Antonio did some of that. He covered just about all of these bases. And again, we know we have more research to go. We have African-American genealogy challenges. Records could be destroyed, not recorded. Sometimes people know information, could be on the descendant side. They're not sharing it. Sometimes they're just limiting themselves to being online. And so a lot of us talk about when we do these talks is about going local. You got to go into the local community and do research and find out what people have at the courthouses, historical societies, and so forth. And also that sometimes not realizing that surnames can change. If they had a Colbert at one time, but maybe when they got free, it could be another name. And of course, spelling doesn't count. The majority of the research looking for enslaved individuals, be it for your family or a project that you're working on, you might be dealing with the challenge of a first name only. So in some aspects, you know, that's good. And another thing, it makes it harder. And sometimes we don't do a deep enough analysis, because you saw how Antonio was able to connect, remembering what was on the inventory sheet and then looking at the 1870 census. Some of the information might be questionable or reliable. Sometimes the oral history kind of gets turned around, but it's so vital to hear whatever oral history has come from generation to generation, because those could be the exact clues that the researcher would need. And of course, you've heard this time and time again, spelling does not count. And sometimes we have to have a research plan. And as far as what Antonio and I and others have done, we kind of map out what we're going to be doing. And we always want to focus at the local level and exhaust that as much as we can. And that's one of the reasons that we're here. And also another challenge that we also often face as researchers is letting our 21st century thinking and going back into, you know, maybe the 18th century or the 19th century and trying to figure things out. Well, we have to realize that during these times that people were enslaved, some of the things that we know of and assume and take for granted today, there was no inkling of anything like that. So that's another way of thinking, how do I manage, how do I conduct this research? As a good researcher, as we all are, we got to start with the map. So I had to map out, when I'm picking up from where you heard Antonio say Clarke County, talked about Winchester and Frederick County, also adjacent counties, Fauquier, you know, you're looking at Loudoun and other counties that are surrounding the area that I'm researching. So I targeted an area. Also, the records and resources, there's the Black Laws of Virginia. You got to know what law was in place because that might direct you where possible records are at. And I will go through more of these, and people are also welcome to take screenshots of this if you would like, because it lists, it's almost like a checklist. You know, you want to look for the slaveholder wills. Where do you get it at? I've listed courthouse, historical societies online. Also, of course, with the family. Tax records, administrative records, and estate records. Antonio showed us an example of that. The Chancery records, a gold mine. They're at the Library of Virginia, they're online. Also, of course, the local courthouse. Federal population census, slave schedules, vital statistic records. You got the Freedmen's Bureau and the Freedmen Bank, slave birth index, as you saw an example of. There's buying, selling, insured, rental, and mortgage records. This is how enslaved people could be identified, again, as property. And again, going back to the federal population census, which is every 10 years, could give you some glimpse. Also being involved with any descendant groups, and also knowing what other groups are out there that talks about this type of research, like Black Pro-Gen, people that do blogs. You got OGS, which is the Afro American Historical Genealogical Society, and also Maggie, which is the only genealogy institute focused on African ancestry. And the proper name of that is the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute. We're lucky in the area of where I'm at and working with the University of Virginia that we have the Descendants of the Enslaved Communities, which we just call DEC. They are a nonprofit. They have a mission to research and reclaim the narrative, honor the legacies of enslaved and free Black communities and their descendants, and to achieve restorative justice for communities rooted at the University of Virginia and surrounding regions. I partner with them on quite a lot, sharing information. They share information with me. It is a hub for folks, as in descendants of enslaved communities, to keep up to date on what's going on and find out what educational information that might be out there. And I put their website down there. And again, take a screenshot if you'd like, but it's descendantsuva.org. So, starting my plan for the research was to build some trees. As an African American and a descendant of myself of enslaved individuals and families, I could also be a descendant of the slaveholder. So doing African American research, it is almost critical that you research the family, the slaveholding family. You're going to have to do both. You can't just do African American, because again, during this time, if they were enslaved or even free, you're going to have to find out who else is around them and in that neighborhood or that community. So I built a tree. Even though I had Antonio's research, I had to learn that family, where they were coming from, and also find their records. So you see Colonel Tuley, I started with him and built a tree on ancestry, and again, looking for records and resources and also connections. So here's some more. I also had to think of the enslaved individuals, like Antonio showed us on the inventory list. So I had the pleasure of him having that. For other projects and things, we might not have the inventory sheets. You're going to have to find those. But you can see Richard Colbert over to the left. Bannister was another enslaved individual. And then, of course, I'm showing you Tuley's family. And so I've got trees on them, looking for hints, looking for records, looking for resources and any connections or access to information. So if you remember, Antonio showed us Colonel Joseph Tuley Jr., you know, and his inventory list. So I pulled out some of the individuals that were enslaved that had the surnames. We made the comment about a lot of them having surnames, which is amazing because that's not always the case. The research that I do for the Memorial of the Enslaved Laborers at UVA probably 90% are first name only, which makes the research a little more challenging. So here you see the surname Armstead, Bowen, Frost, and Blunder, just as examples. And that came from the 1860 appraisement and inventory sheet. So I'm on the trail. I find the Bowen family in the 1870 census, and you know what? They're in the same place where there's a Robert Frost, which is in Clarke County. And again, you're looking at the 1870 census in Clarke County and the township or the area called Greenway. So I go on to Bob Frost. Remember, he's on the list. But I also built that tree. He was an enslaved ancestor to hopefully descendants that we're looking for. So you can see we have the fabulous luxury of using these online databases to put these records and things upon which documents what has been looked at. But every record you see, you also have to wonder what other records connect. So we can see that Robert Frost was found in the 1870 census. He also has some Freedmen Bureau records, which covers a period right after the Civil War from 1865 and through 1878 in most cases. So now, at this point with this individual, I have not been able to find any descendants as of yet. This is a collection of records, excuse me, that was done through the Alexandria Library. The project was headed up by Leslie Anderson. And this is the Virginia Slave Birth Index. Virginia required slaveholders to start documenting the slave births in 1853, and these books go to 1865. They are in the local historical societies and the public libraries in your Virginia communities. You also can purchase these books on Amazon. And again, they're sitting right next to me because I am in and out of them constantly trying to track from the slave owner to maybe the mother's name and possibly where they were born, and of course the enslaved person, the baby's name. So Antonio mentioned about Elias Earl in Clarke County. This is a page in the Slave Birth Index that gives me some information, because you can see where the arrow's at. You see Mr. Earl, and also it's telling me if it's a male or female and when they were born. These are more leads for me to go after. And you see the location is noted as well. And I was looking up Bannister, Prince, and Seton as well. But again, I'm looking up slaveholder or the informant, because it might not be the slaveholder. It could be the overseer, whoever gave the information. You're going to get the slave name. You're going to get the mother's name, the date of birth, and of course, the place of birth. So this is a valuable index that people can also look at, and also note that they're online as well. So here you saw where Antonio talked about the executor Mary Mitchell and Dick Colbert. So let's look at him for a moment. So, of course, I set up a tree on Richard Dick because there's a variation of Dick. There's his birth and his approximate death. And then I find the records that I was able to research, and possibly I've got his wife and then some of the children. So you're just getting a glimpse of some of the work that goes into doing, I'm going to say, slave era research, because look at the dates. He's born in 1850. We know that Dick was enslaved. So where is there going to be records? I'm showing you what pick up after slavery. But of course, it should be able to lead me to before the 1870 census. So there's progress right now. We know we've got up to 5 descendants that connect to Dick. And also 2 of them might be for the same Tom Bannister. That family also connected to the Colberts. There's some connections to the Strange. And again, all these connections might be due to marriages. And again, can exhaust the local level enough to find out where are these families, who do they connect with. I've got a lead on a Bob Frost descendant and one on George Armstead, which again might connect to the other Armstead as well. So typical slave era records and resources. We'd like to share to give people the opportunity to say, here's places you should check, you know, and go down the checklist. This is not just slave era, even though I've titled it that. This is kind of resources and records for just doing genealogical research, period. You got to look at the community again. And I'm going to keep driving that about going at the local level. You got genealogy groups, historical societies. So we are reaching out to the community saying, do you know of any of these? Tax records. You even saw apprenticeship records or deed records, marriage records. And again, are we talking about people enslaved or are we talking about the enslaver? It's both. It's both. Remember the statement I made on the challenges. One of them is because during slave era, individuals could be rented, of course, bought and sold. They could be insured. They could be mortgaged. And they also could be used as collateral for a debt, but they also could be gifted. So that's why you have to research marriage records and research the European side to be able to find out if anybody was gifted. I have seen hundreds of wills that also share that their property is being left to their children. And also you saw that example in Antonio's research as well. Also think about any lawsuits. We highlighted, or Antonio highlighted, about the Chancery Court records. For Virginia, you will see those at the Library of Virginia, so they're online. And then you have the Freedman's Bank account. That gives you relationships. You know, you could see, I'm the head of the household. This is my wife. These are my children. And they will have birth dates. But you know what? Here's my parents. This is where they were born. And then, of course, you got the Freedmen's Bureau, which is various records within that collection. There's 3.5 million records, and those are online as well. Here's some more. Continue, you know, working with the faith community, and I'm putting that plea out now, coming to knock on your door, and to talk and see if there's people there that connect to any of these families. Of course, the wills and probates of any of the slaveholders. Can we locate bill of sales, newspaper, manumission? Talked about Maggie, the Genealogy Institute. That would be including people from all over, but they could have ties to Virginia. You got to look at a census and know who's in the neighborhood. And from one census to another, realize who, if the people are the same from, say, 1870 to 1880, are the same people in the neighborhood. Where did they come from? Are they all born in another county and are all seem to be grouped together? Can you look at the 1870 census and kind of do a deeper dive on it and understanding each of the columns and where they're at, and also whose property are they living on? That's something we tend not to think about. If we find our ancestor in 1870 census, and if they're not owning the property, can you find out whose property they were on? And if there were any sheriff sales in that county also that happened, and that might be where we could find names. So I'm walking through several of the documents and resources that Antonio and I and other researchers that do the slave era research. Those are, again, like a checklist. And here, and I'm going to turn this over to Antonio for this slide, and I'll take the next one. And we're talking about once forgotten and now remembered.
So when I first started presenting about my research, one of the things that I really wanted to do was to notate the individuals who who I'd found those people that were enslaved. And the reason why I say that is because some of these people's names haven't been spoken since they left this earth. And I think that it's very powerful, especially, you know, we talk about language. Language is very, very powerful. So I think it's important that we pay tribute to those who came before, those people that were enslaved, who, you know, their work, the work that they did funded and lined the pockets of, you know, this family. So Adeline, Anera, Anderson, Andy, Ananias, Betty, Bill, Bill Brown, Billy Front Royal, Ben, Nancy, Boatswain, Bob Frost, Bob Plunder, Boren, Seeley, Charles, Charlotte, Cynthia, Daniel Henson, Derry, Dick Dorcas, Elisha, Elizabeth, Ellen, Emily, Fairfax, Fanny, Felicia, Frank, Daniel, Frankie, Gabriel, George Armstead, Hannah, Hitty, Jack Birch, Jacob, Jane, Jeffrey.
Oops, hold on. And I'll take this one. Jet, Jim, John Armstead, John Bowen, Jonas, Julia, Katie, Laura, Louis, Louisa, Lucy, Lydia, Mahala, Maria, Martha, Mary, Matt, Molly, Boatswain, Lee, Rachel, Washington, Faymore, Peg, Pat, Petsy, Peter, Pleasant, Rachel, Richard, Robert, Rose, Sam, Sarah, Peg, and I'm going to pronounce Scipio, Cinta, Susan, Susanna, Thornton, Tom, Tamar, Warrington, Winnie, Phil, Sarah, and Scott. Once forgotten, but they are now remembered. Folks, these are the names that we are looking for. We are calling them out, and we want to hopefully connect if you think you connect. Here's opportunities for furthering the research that we have done. And I've compiled a list that Antonio had as well as myself. But again, we want to keep looking at chancery lawsuits because sometimes that's talking about divvying up, and I'll say it that way, property. And there could be challenges that are in these chancery lawsuits. They could be 10 pages or they could be 200 pages, and it is worth going through them. We continue to seek slave owners and descendants of the enslaved. We plan on engaging with the community there in Clarke and the area communities. So we have road trips coming up and other virtual meetings that we invite people to engage with us to keep this research going and seeking these descendants. And we want to collaborate with any of the genealogy groups that are in the area. We appreciate the aspects of the descendants reconnecting. We're locating descendants, of course, of those enslaved. We're looking for the oral history. For us as researchers, those are clues. Those are some directions. We're laying that foundation, creating a public database with information, much like that UVA has on the Jewel site, mapping out known families in order to find a surname, and connecting with repositories in special collections, manuscript divisions like the ledger at Duke University's Rubenstein Library. And remember, the biggest repository that's not online is the house repository. Talk to the elders in your family. If you think you connect, what's in their house? Do they have photos, documents besides the oral histories? That is the biggest repository we're reaching out for. So for us, we need you. We're talking about community engagement. Again, our number one goal is to locate and engage descendants to help tell those stories and make that reconnection happen. And we want to engage in the community. We're offering genealogy educational sessions. We also have one-on-one genealogy consultations, you know, to help provide people with resources. We need to connect with you in order to find out if you're going to connect to one of the names that we called out. So again, here's some contact information. You've got my email there. There's a Facebook page where you can always find me. And there's a group of us that are doing this type of research, and we host Freedmen Bureau Fridays on Friday nights to come in. And again, we highlight Freedmen Bureau records because it's right after the Civil War, and that's people that are looking for help. Rations, could be transportation records, labor contracts, and so forth. There is the link to the Descendants of the Enslaved Communities page. Join, become a member, keep up to date on what's going on. And also I put Antonio's email on here. He could forward them on to me. And I just want to say I appreciate Antonio's work and what he has done, because that's the landing page for where I'm going forward, and also the institutions so that we're all connected with, and that's Blandy, Arboretum, the University of Virginia, and the University of Virginia Foundation. So we're going to open it up now for Q&A, and I'm going to turn to Ariel and Connor. And if you've got questions, throw in there.
Can I say something right quick?
Absolutely.
That was my country coming out. I just wanted to say thank you, because some of my family is actually on here. I see my Aunt Jo. I see my Uncle Martin and Aunt Renee, my cousin Tamara, my cousin Toya, one of my professors, Dr. Ashley Preston, another North Carolinian. Thank you all so much for being here.
Yes, yes. So Ariel, do you have any questions you can share with us?
Well, we haven't had any questions come in so far on the chat. If you do have a question, don't be shy. Feel free to add. I will say lots of great feedback coming in on the chat. Fabulous presentation, so much information and resources. So great talk.
And I also want to thank Karen Kay. She's a genealogy buddy up in Maryland. She posted some information in the chat on upcoming talks and conferences that are available coming up. And of course, we also have some people from the Descendants of the Enslaved Communities also here present. And David Carr, you're here. If you'd like to say anything, just come off and we'll say hi to you at Blandy.
Just thank you very much, Shelley and Antonio, for a great presentation and very exciting turnout for your presentation. I think you made a lot of connections here.
That's our goal. And I see Carolyn Dillard, and she's off mic too. She is with the University of Virginia as well. Carolyn, if you'd like to say anything, either representing UVA, and let me see if DEC, so I'll take, you can come off mic, Carolyn, if you're there.
Good afternoon. I just want to say it was a very thorough presentation. I really appreciate it. We do have Bertha French on the call, who is the co-chair of the Descendants of Enslaved Communities at UVA, and very happy to see her. And it's just, I think this is a great opportunity for Clarke County community to come together and kind of, you know, just try to build community through presentations like this. It's tough conversations, but together we can do it.
Yes. Bertha, if you want to say anything, I also see Deceased Gathers is here also from Descendants of the Enslaved Communities. You're welcome to pop on if you'd like to say anything.
Thank you, everybody, for doing this excellent work. This is really a heavy lift. I know, you know, Antonio, this must be, and Shelley, again, this, you all make it look easy, but the pieces that you're pulling together take a lot of time and effort, and just the weight of the material that you're exploring, I know can take a emotional toll. But we're Descendants of Enslaved Communities at the University of Virginia. While we have UVA in our name, we are an independent organization. And we are very keen on supporting the work to identify the 4,000 plus individuals who supported the seating, the building, and the maintenance at the University of Virginia and surrounding communities, of which Blandy is one. And we look forward to hearing more about the results of this work. We're happy that we were able to support this. Thank you.
Thank you.
A wonderful t-shirt on. I just want to let you know.
I see. I thought you would catch that, Howard University.
Yes, I have a very strong legacy.
Yes, I know that's right.
HU.
We do have
I
a few-
also want to say, aren't you also a graduate from UVA?
Yes, I am a graduate.
Understand. Oops. My story just popped on.
I
But I
won't
do see a
camera, but I will say good morning.
I did too. So.
Hello, I will say good morning. I won't come on camera, but I will say good morning to everyone. And this was a fabulous presentation and so happy to hear it. Good to see you again, Antonio. Woohoo!
Thank you.
And your good work. And I also see one person I want to ask a quick question. Joseph Roby.
Yes. Yeah,
Um,
we're getting ready to go to his question.
It said enslaved at Oakley. Where's that at? Oakley what? It's got dots behind it. I was just trying to see.
Joseph, you want to respond?
Sure, yeah, that's actually kind of related to my question. So Oakley is a plantation a couple miles away from Upperville that's in Clarke County. And my question was about the runaway ad with Susanna and John Carter. So I've been looking up while I'm listening to, I've been looking up wills and a sales list and things like that to try to figure out which John Carter this is in a
Great connection there.
yeah.
So isn't your Upperville, are we talking about Fauquier, but also a lot of stuff connects to Loudoun County as well, so those areas. So I think that's a good point you're making to find out which John Carter. And Antonio, I'm not sure, because there's several John Carters. And again, I connected to Loudoun and also Fauquier on the Carters. I don't know if you have any comment on that, but that's definitely something to look at, Joseph. So thank you for bringing that.
So I do have a comment. So I did go to Fauquier County once during my time at Blandy, and I remember from the ad, it was I think it was John Carter Esquire. That was like important like thing that I noted because, you know, John and Carter are two different, you know, there are two like common names. But then also the year was very important because I want to say that the ad was posted either in, my memory's a little off, but it was posted either in like January of 1842 or 43, meaning the estate sale would have been in the fall of 41 or 42. So like, even though it's not a long ad, it gave a lot of great information. And I can't remember there being anything fruitful from that. I don't think that I was able to like find where she was actually purchased by Colonel Tuley, but we do know that it obviously happened because we have, you know, he posted several ads looking for her. I don't believe that she was actually apprehended because I never find any mention of her in any type of record outside of that.
Great, thank you. And I also see a point made by Robert Solch to everyone. He says he's a member of Coming to the Table, and also he descends from 2 enslavers in Louisa County, Anderson and the Gooch family. Do you consider that area as your purview? It is in my purview, Robert. Yes, because the Central Virginia area is the ones that are connecting to the memorial to the enslaved laborers at UVA, and Louisa County is one of them. It might not connect to Clarke County, Winchester, and the area around there, but it definitely connects to the other properties. So please put your email in the chat and I'll be happy to follow up with you and seeing if those two slaveholders were connected. Appreciate that. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions?
Dr. Murphy,
Mr. Walker is,
Which is,
I think Mr. Walker is saying something, but he's on mute.
yeah. Chuck Walker, you're on mute. He is connected to Bannisters and possibly Colberts or vice versa or both.
You're still on mute.
I think should get it.
Mhm.
We appreciate Chuck being here. We connected on Ancestry. And he just needs to unmute.
Here we are.
There you
You
go.
there? Yes, Antonio, I am from the Millwood, Greenway, Boyce, Upperville area. I'm 84 years old, so I did a lot of research in that area. I appreciate what you've done, and you took me back further than I have gone. I'm back to 1849.
Oh, good.
So you've taken me, shown me where I can go from there. And I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Great.
Also, I think Moral Calvian, she may have dropped off, but shout out to her and thank you to her because she was also very helpful. Her and Clarke County Historical Association, very, very helpful in my research. Of course, Blandy staff, love those guys.
Yes, absolutely. Tina Hodges has a question just to clarify that the names which were read so beautifully towards the end of the presentation, were they related to UVA and the Tuleyries, Blandy, or just at the Arboretum? Those names were to the Tuleyries. UVA, I guess owns, I don't know, David owns Blandy. And of course, the Blandy was part of the Tuleyries Plantation originally. And so the names we were reading were specifically, and I'm going to say the Clarke County in area. I'm going to say it that way because there's different communities, township areas around Clarke County. And that's why we also wanted to expand and bring forth information on Frederick County, Warrington, and Clarke as well, and even into Jefferson, because we don't know where people went. And again, we're after descendants of these folks. So we just took that area. Remember me showing you the map? Took that area same way that I used in for Central Virginia down around the university. So it pertains specifically to this area.
So one of the things that I learned while at Blandy, so Graham Blandy, who Blandy is named after, was actually inherited. He had purchased, he was originally from New York, and he had purchased the actual like Tuleyries estate. So the actual house and a good chunk of the land. So in his will, he left part of the land to UVA to teach men how to farm. Am I right, Dave? Okay. And so
Yeah,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think the language is young boys.
Okay,
How
that's
to
what I thought it
farm.
was young boys, but I was like, that doesn't sound right. And so the university acquired it in the 1920s. But one of the things that I think I may have mentioned, I've done this presentation a couple times, so don't know which version, but I do know that the first director of Blandy, Dr. Orland White, we do believe that he had access to the 1905 plat that would have been created around the time that Blandy, Graham Blandy actually like purchased it and purchased the land, because there is a little box that says old slave burying ground. And we know that if you look at the picture from the presentation, you see that there were trees planted all around the area, but was not planted inside of what was notated as the old slave burying ground. So UVA did not have like a direct link in this case to the Tuleyries and the enslavement of these people. However, they obtained the land afterwards.
Thank you for that. Any other final questions? And again, this session has been recorded. We're going to have it up on the different sites so people can go back through, and especially number one, as resources for your own research. Also hoping to connect with the families of the descendants of the enslaved, as well as the slaveholders, and also to connect with the descendants of enslaved communities, especially in Virginia. You want connections, information, and resources. So we will be posting that. Everyone that registered can also get the link back to the recording as well. And just give me a little bit of time. I'm going to try to edit it, or I'm going to have someone take off the first couple of minutes there. And let me see if there were any other.
There was another question.
Yes, I wanted to say something.
Okay.
I just recently made a connection on my paternal side of the family to the Bannisters. And I need to do a lot more research because the connection I have are not too far back, but I am related to the Bannisters.
Well, Sandra, we know each other, so we need to connect.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
we do.
So let's follow up with that. And again, we'll do like the roots check, I call it, and schedule, get on a Zoom. That's what is available, that one-on-one consultations. If you think you have a connection, please contact me, and we'll go from there. Review your tree, you know, and see what research you have, where you might have gaps that I might be able to help fill in, and go forth from there. And so that's the opportunity and outreach to you, those in the community and connections. Antonio?
So there was a comment by Robert Schultz. Did we omit cemeteries? Death records should track that, I presume. But for instance, there's a certain cemetery burial ground on the property of my enslaving ancestors. So the thing is, this would have been more so active during slavery. And because of where it's located, there is some conjecture, I would say, about if it was specifically for the use of the Tuley family, or possibly other families in the area, if it was for like community. But there wouldn't be any information regarding that, because it wasn't like it was a slave cemetery. Essentially, it wasn't any type of like formal cemetery where there would have been any type of documentation, unfortunately. So the plat is really the only thing that kind of gives us insight on the fact that there is that place on the property.
And I want to respond to Martin and Renee on question. Yes, when we send that link out to the recording, yes, you are welcome to share it. The widely it gets, and for people that can find any connections to this area in Virginia, we would appreciate it. And Laura,
That's
you
my
have
aunt
your
and
hand
uncle.
up. I'm sorry, but you say?
I said, that's my aunt and uncle.
Okay. Hello, Aunt and Uncle. Laura, you had a question?
Yes, I just wanted to make a quick comment. You know, I'm into the DNA, and right away I looked for Tuley, and I found a whole page.
Oh,
Also, I see a spelling Tooley, the Tuley.
Yeah.
So, you know, as you know, my Bradshaw line connects to UVA somehow. And I saw the name Cynthia, and I have her connected to my Bradshaws. So I'm going to do further research. And the person I saw was Sarah Tuley. that whole page, that line goes back to her.
Okay.
And I see a lot of 1% African people. So it's, it goes way back. So I'll research it and let you know what I come up with. But the Cynthia, it's a really unique name. And her last name is Williams, connecting to my Bradshaws. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And of course, we connect. She's one that's also with us on Freedmanville Fridays.
Mhm.
Any other questions? And we want to close this out, and I'm going to stop this recording. We appreciate everyone coming out and spending Saturday with us. We're going to give you back some time. Any questions, just follow up with me, and you can find me on Facebook on that screen. If you took a screenshot, or just Google, you'll find both of us, Antonio and I, or the Descendants of the Enslaved Community. Can always get back to us with your questions or hopefully connections. Just want everybody to have a great afternoon, and thank you for coming.